school student Alex Browning boards Vola Copyright E Airlines Flight 180, a Boeing 747, with his classmates for their senior trip to Paris from John F. Kennedy Airport. Before takeoff, Alex has a premonition of a mechanical failure leading to an in-air explosion that kills everyone on board. When the events from his vision begin to occur in reality, he panics, causing a fight with his rival Carter Horton. As a result, Alex, Carter, as well as Alex's best friend Todd Wagner, Carter's girlfriend Terry Cheney, teacher Valerie Luton, students Billy Hitchcock, and Clear Rivers, are removed from the plane. None of them, except Clear, believe Alex about his vision until the plane explodes shortly after takeoff. Afterward, the survivors are interrogated by FBI agents Ween and Shrek, who are suspicious of Alex. 39 days later, after attending a memorial service for the victims, an unusual chain reaction causes Todd to be accidentally hanged in his shower. Although his death is ruled a suicide, Alex and Clear sneak into the funeral home to examine Todd's corpse. The mortician, William Bloodworth, reveals that the survivors have disrupted Death's plan, and Death is now claiming the lives of those meant to die in the explosion. While discussing their next move at a CAFA copyright, the remaining survivors gather outside, where Terry is ran over and killed by a speeding bus. After watching a news report on the cause of the explosion, Alex deduces that Death is reclaiming the survivors in the order of their intended deaths on the plane. Nonetheless, he is too late to save Ms. Luton, whose CRT monitor explodes after she accidentally drips vodka over it, causing a fire in the kitchen and the splinters from which pierces her in the neck. She attempts to reach for a towel but accidentally pulls down a knife, which wounds her. Alex arrives and pulls out the knife but is forced to flee before the house explodes. Alex explains the situation to the remaining survivors as they drive. Carter, enraged by Terry's death and who Alex deduces is next to die, drives recklessly and stops on the track of an oncoming train, attempting to die on his own terms. After the others escape, Carter changes his mind, but his seatbelt jams. Alex manages to save him just before the car is destroyed, but the shrapnel from the wreckage decapitates Billy. Alex realizes that by intervening in Carter's death, the sequence has moved to himself. Alex spends the next day hiding out in a fortified cabin, only to remember changing seats with two classmates during his premonition and realize Clear is actually next. He rushes to her house to save her while being pursued by Ween and Shrek, who suspect Alex is responsible for the survivors' deaths. Alex finds Clear trapped inside her car and surrounded by loose electrical cables which ignite a gasoline leak around her. He grabs a cable, allowing her to escape from the car just before it explodes. 6 months later, Alex, Clear, and Carter travel to Paris to celebrate their survival. While discussing their ordeal, Alex reveals that Death never skipped him after saving Clear. Just as they worry, a bus hurls a parking sign toward a neon sign, which descends toward Alex. Carter pushes Alex out of the way at the last second, but the sign swings back down toward Carter and kills him. It's still a fun watch after 2 decades. Student Alex Browning is set to travel to Paris along with his classmates. Before he gets on the plane he has a vivid premonition, and sees the plane destroyed. He and a few others get off the plane, but Death has a plan already mapped out. I've always rated Final Destination as one of my favorite horrors. I think it scores incredibly highly in terms of originality. Rewatching it now, I guess I find it a little corny, possibly not as good as I remember, but it's still a fun watch. It holds up pretty well. It's straightforward to follow, unlike some of the movies in the genre today. I think it's worthy of a 7/10. It holds your interest. The special effects, for 2000, aren't bad at all. I think the plane sequences still look great. Some of the accidents are perhaps a little less convincing. Devon Sawa is fine as Alex. He plays the part well, even if the character is a little irritating at times. My daughter will not watch this before flying, lol. Final Destination is an awesome movie full of fun jump scares and humorous accidents, which is exactly what you want in this type of movie. As there are half a dozen of these movies, it does become a challenge to separate what deaths happen in each movie, as they all blend together somewhat. It's targeted at a teen audience. In spite of that, the film works for all age groups. Check it out. Smiley face. Only bad movies dare to be this bold. It's not surprising that critics bashed this movie. In a movie review, most critics primarily value cohesion, refinement, calculated expertise. Clearly that is not Final Destination. Much of the acting feels reminiscent of daytime TV shows. Lots of the dialogue is awkward, and contrived as ways to clarify plot points and move the story forward. The editing often fails to convey the right mood, seemingly dramatic moments coming off as humorous moments feeling at odds with the rising tension. In short, as with most teen horror flicks, this is not what most would consider a good movie. But something special can happen when a movie stops taking itself too seriously. Pure inventiveness. The idea that the killer can be the fabric of life itself, instilled in me a type of fear I'd never expected from a horror film. Everyday objects like kitchen appliances and fishing rods are now something to be feared. It leads to a sense that you can't trust any aspect of the seemingly mundane world around you. And though many of the deaths feel pretty ridiculous, though in incredibly entertaining ways, in a sense, they are also the most realistic deaths a horror movie could show. Freak accidents happen every day. Most of us don't know how or when we're going to die. The world around you could be out to get you at any time. The fear comes through in the characters' distrust in everyday life, and struggle against the inevitable. From this paranoia comes a fun and compelling story, one with unexpected turns around every corner as the characters fight against this unique existential threat. What Final Destination lacks in refinement, it makes up for in creativity and pure entertainment. Finally, the first popcorn tosser of the year. Loved it. Imagine any great slasher with no killer. No person to blame, nobody to see, and no idea how that person will die. That's about the simple horror of Final Destination, and it was done in almost artistic ways. While many movie makers have been unwilling or unable to get into the meat and potatoes behind a good R-rated movie, the creators of Final Destination have no such restraint. In fact, the death scenes were so freakishly violent and intricate that they were interesting in and of themselves. Imagine the force of death, not the Grim Reaper, but the phenomenon of accidents, if you will, being majorly P.'d for having missed a few. Hence the plot. To make matters worse, the director displayed the little things hyper-accurately. That alone made watching it really hard at times without wincing, flinching, or screaming out loud. Those who have seen this know exactly what I'm talking about. As someone who goes to the movies every Friday, I have been waiting for this forever. Oh, and by movie, I mean movie, not film, not indie, not flick. A movie is something that I first hear of through word of mouth, first see a glimpse of via previews of another movie, and, after seeing it, leave the theater flashing back through great scenes and lines for the next few hours saying to myself that was great. Final Destination was a great movie. They don't make them like this too often. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure if you were looking for flaws you could find them. No movie is perfect, but I wasn't and enjoyed my ride thoroughly as a result. Personally, I think that if you had the time to pay attention to those flaws while watching it for the very first time, I've got news for you, you missed a great movie. Final Destination, or A Flight 180 as it was titled right up until the last minute, was a surprise hit of 2000. It was made with a modest budget of $23 million. It grossed a nice sum of $53 million in the US. It was in the UK, however, where the film really shone, up against the massive epic Gladiator. At the time the movie managed to gross a none too bad £1.11 but what made it better was it was a true sleeper hit. It spent 14 weeks in the UK film charts. With no big name actors, and no major publicity, the film did so well because of word of mouth, and the word was it was damn good. I admit I was skeptical at first in reading about Final Destination. It seemed like a tired teen horror movie that seemed to be spewing out of America at that time. Indeed, it was only until about 3 weeks into it being released that I actually lifted my bum off my sofa and put my bum on the seat in front of the big screen to actually watch the movie. I loved it, and it was made better by the low expectations I had of it. It isn't groundbreaking, but it is effectively chilly at times. The acting is surprisingly good and the plot is pretty fresh. James Wong, X-Files, came up with the idea of the movie, about cheating death, and it does seem to have a kind of X-Files ring to it. The story goes as follows. Alex, Devon Sawa, is off, with his classmates, to France. Now being in America, France is like our version of America, so it's a pretty big deal. While on the plane he has a premonition of the plane exploding. Slightly scared, he wakes up and finds that some of his premonition turns out real. Scared for his life, and the others on the plane, he causes a fuss which sees him and several other classmates chucked off the plane. Some of his companions are none too pleased until they see Flight 180 blow up, killing everyone on the plane. Thus begins the cat and mouse chase by Death himself. One by one, in seemingly accidental ways, the survivors of the ill-fated crash are dying. While others dismiss the idea of Death coming for revenge, Alex isn't going to let it go, and soon he convinces friend Claire, Larter, that it is up to them to try and stop Death himself. As this happens, we can witness some of the most imaginative death scenes ever. Thanks to the movie not having a masked killer doing the rounds, the death scenes are not limited to the a knife in back/stomach/head/eye routine. Indeed, the first death scene is both funny and horrific all in one because, like with many of the deaths in this movie, it can really seem as that can actually happen. It gives you something to think about. The special effects, for a movie with as small as budget as this, are excellent. Apparently they did actually spend half of their budget in the SFX. The plane crash is one of the most realistic you will see. It's worrying to watch. For a movie aimed at the teenager end of the market, and for a genre renowned for hammy acting, the people in this movie actually do a good job. Devon Sawa, no stranger to movies, is perfect at playing the lead role of the troubled Alex. Kerr Smith, Dawson's Creek, does a major turnaround from what you are used to seeing him as. This time he's the typical school jock, flash car, blonde girlfriend, bad temper, but luckily he doesn't play it into overkill. Another nice surprise is Sean William Scott, American Pie, Road Trip, too many teen movies. While we are used to seeing him as the guy who cracks jokes and makes fun of the others, he plays the geeky guy this time, and he provides us with quite a bit of comic relief. We also have a nice cameo of Tony Todd, aka the Candyman, as Bloodworth, who plays the man at the morgue. He is suitably chilling, and is set to play a larger part in the sequel. Suspense-wise, this film doesn't fail either. In many films like this you are guessing who will be killed next. Not so in this movie. You are actually told who is going to meet death next. However, this doesn't spoil it. Suspense is carried over by how the person will die. If you know a person is going to die as soon as the camera pans of them, and they're all alone, then you're waiting in anticipation for them to die, but there are many false scares along the way. Also, the suspense is kept up throughout the movie. It doesn't seem to drag too much at any time. There are very few bad points to the movie. Obviously it will depend on your taste whether you like it or not, whether you consider it too teeny or too teeny but just right anyway. This film does have fun as well as generate scares. It is worth noting that there is an alternate ending to the movie and quite a few deleted scenes, namely a main subplot where Claire becomes pregnant. I think that it was wise to omit these parts. The ending seemed cheesy, but the one we are left with is excellent. Final Destination, thanks to an imaginative story, nice acting, and some elaborate death scenes, breathes new life into the tired genre of teen horror. It is not as widely recognized as the Scream trilogy, but in many respects it's better. Let's hope the sequel maintains the high standard it has set. Final Destination is different, nicely acted, filled with imaginative deaths. Final Destination is not low on suspense, a typical teen horror going to be shown as in-flight entertainment. Final Destination / 2000. Starring Devon Sawa, Ali Larter, Kerr Smith, Chad E. Donella, Amanda Detmer, and Kristen Cloak. Directed by James Wong. Written by Jeffrey Reddick, Glenn Morgan, and James Wong. Running time, 90 minutes. Rated R, for terror, violence and language. I think it is safe to say every individual has different feelings about death. Some fear it. Others deny it. Most are weary in some way regarding decease. Final Destination is a perfect thriller for skeptics, detailing 7 confused individuals who accidentally escape demise, discovering the impossibility of defrauding their destined time. The film's atmosphere provokes cringe through a presumably omnipresent force stalking the characters, producing audience participation whether the Grim Reaper is footsteps away from us all. Devon Sawa, Idle Hands, Wild America, is a high school senior named Alex Browning. He and his French class are at an airport flying to Paris for a field trip with their teacher, Ms. Luton, Kristen Cloak. Once on the plane, Alex begins to experience a dreamlike vision of the jet exploding in midair, killing all of its passengers. As the plane is about to descend, Alex notices his illusion gradually comes to life. This leaves him no choice but to cause a small riot, leaving him and 6 other passengers thrown off the flight. Students Carter, Kerr Smith, the ignorant jerk, and girlfriend Terry, Amanda Detmer, Alex's best friend, Todd, Chad E. Donella, other peers Billy, Sean William Scott, Claire, Ali Larter, Ms. Luton, and Alex watch from the airport as their late flight bursts into flames within minutes after takeoff, leaving these characters suspiciously confused about fate. The film wastes no time depicting its setup. The rushed opening leads to lack of character development. Whereas the characters' personalities are clear, we feel little remorse for many of them. The dramatic premise is horrific and revealing, playing like an extended The X-Files episode without paranormal detectives. Final Destination is creative and full of variety. We witness the plane crash from 2 different perspectives, as a passenger and an observer. Days after the crash, the survivors begin to die in unusual manners, almost as if a curse of death was placed on them for cheating demise. Alex digs deeper and discovers his companions are being killed by strange coincidences in the order they would have died from the explosion on the flight. In desperation, he attempts to contradict death for everyone remaining while under superstition of 2 disillusioned law enforcers. There are a few overlooked characters in Final Destination, mostly adults who seem to have an IQ score in the mid-90s. The teenagers' parents are left out most of the story. There is also a briefly creepy appearance by a mortician, but is short-circuited by the plot. He is one of the many characters who end up explaining a lot of the plot to us. Most recent teen horror romps feature a madman chasing characters with sharp objects. Final Destination is too smart to fall in that cliché copyright, however. It has a punctual reason for inhabiting teens. These are young people full of energy and life, all the more reason for them to fight death. The film, written by Jeffrey Reddick, Glenn Morgan, and director James Wong, never explains why the Alex character has visions of upcoming disasters. The idea makes for an intriguing story, but there are no interesting subplots or side characters here. Therefore, without being backed up by supporting stories, the filmmakers must thoroughly justify the character's reason for being. Wong seems to overlook Alex's illusions, a concept holding the entire movie together. Although Final Destination provides many edge-of-your-seat surprises and tension, the film likes to poke fun at many of its scenes. Like the average teenage thriller, the movie takes itself seriously about 3/4 of the time, leaving the last quarter as comic relief. Certainly, having nothing against comedic sequences in horror flicks, I just prefer a movie true to its genre. Even though Final Destination is nowhere near perfect, it is the truest film to the teen slasher genre a long time. Final Destination is brought to you by New Line Cinema. Fear cannot harm you, it is only the feeling one gets prior to it occurring. There are a number of super talented actors/directors in Hollywood. One of the most prolific is James Wong. In this film, which he not only wrote, but directed as well, he displays what many would consider his best work to date. This is the story of Alex Browning, Devon Sawa, who accompanies his high school friends on a field trip to France. However, moments before the plane departs, Alex has a premonition the plane will explode in mid-air. Sensing he is about to die, he breaks for the exit in a violent plea to leave the aircraft. When he demands to be put off, several of his friends add to his fear by panicking. When they are asked to leave, they are held by the security police in the waiting area, where they all see the plane depart and then moments later explode in mid-air. Thereafter, things which should go better for him, having saved people's lives, go terribly wrong. One by one, all the people whom he saved begin to die mysteriously, with Alex realizing he knows why. Death stalks everyone, but in this story, they are warned in advance. The movie has some horrific moments, which the audience senses become more pronounced as death arrives. Great acting by the cast makes this film a must-see. Still a blast to watch, if even subtler than its sequels. Devon Sawa is young gold, characters you care about, and while not perfect, is worth its merit. The one that started it all, a franchise of over-the-top action, outrageous gore, and characters you often couldn't care less about. Yet in this one, none of those really apply. The death scenes are in ways subtle and clever, sometimes drawn out to exacerbate tension, while others are arguably very predictable, but nonetheless thrilling. The plane scene is chaotic, and how it culminates, very intense. Aside from one decapitation, not much gore. Meanwhile, the characters, in my opinion, are the best the series has had to offer, particularly thanks to Devon Sawa, and the personality he elicits in Alex Browning. Others satisfy, too, from Sean William Scott to Kerr Smith. There's some subtle humor, some drama, and some creativity to be had. As much praise as I have to offer the movie, it still has its many flaws and even silly moments. But for what it's worth, it was the beginning, and it remains a fun watch despite the slew of even more over-the-top installments that followed it. Destination to Death. Final Destination is most notable for two things mainly. The first being that it was the introduction of a fascinating and clever premise that is pretty unique for a supernatural horror. The other being that it was the feature film directing debut of James Wong, best known beforehand as a veteran of the X-Files. It spawned 4 sequels, with the 5th film being released in 2011. While it is flawed and somewhat of an uneven film, the first Final Destination is still, 6 years after the 5th film, one of the franchise's better outings. Perhaps even the best, and the one where the premise feels the freshest. The more stale the concept got, the more the novelty wore off and the less effective the film. Could Final Destination have executed its premise better? Perhaps. Mostly, to me, it did it quite well. Visually, Final Destination looks pretty good for low budget. It's slickly shot and very atmospheric, while the plane effects in the Flight 180 plane scene/explosion are quite impressive. The music score has a suitable eeriness. The film is never dull and is a vast majority of the time fun and suspenseful, with elaborately creative death scenes that are ingeniously unsettling. The film's highlight is the opening Flight 180 scene. Anyone already with a fear of flying will have their fear exemplified, and it is likely to turn people from boarding a plane for a while. Wong does competently with the directing, and the portrayal of death is an interesting and well done one. Acting varies, with personable Devon Sawa, affecting Ali Larter and Tony Todd's creepy cameo coming off best. Really liked the characters' surnames, that were nifty homages to horror/suspense icons. Not all the acting works, however. The others are saddled with one-dimensional and flatly written roles and are a mix of bland, Kristen Cloak, and irritating, Kerr Smith. Also found myself not being able to take Sean William Scott seriously. The biggest issue is the script, which is very high in the cheese and awkwardness factors, and there is some clumsy exposition that often feels underexplored and not really going anywhere. Generally the story is nice, but things could have been explained better and explored more, and it's a little too reliant on coincidence. Things also take a dumb turn towards the end before the film concludes on a logic-defying note. A relatively interesting premise, but Final Destination ultimately sinks nearly to the level of the mass of bonehead teen thrillers that have been so prevalent in the 90s. Spoilers: Final Destination starts off really well, with our unlikely hero Alex in a great scene where he has a dream that the airplane that he is on with all of his high school friends, what high school goes to Europe for a senior trip, is going to explode upon takeoff. This is unquestionably the best scene in the film, both for its creativeness as well as its effectiveness. This kid falls asleep on the plane as everyone is boarding, another common occurrence among high school kids on planes filled with their friends, I'm sure, and has a dream about a defective seat back table and a subsequent, and pretty impressive, explosion on the plane that kills everyone. As the plane is going up in flames and people are getting sucked out through the hole in the side of the plane and burning to death and whatnot, Alex wakes up in a cold sweat and a frantic panic. Suddenly back to reality, he climbs over people trying to get back to the seat where his dream takes place, and when he gets there, he finds the same defective seat back table that was in his dream, and therefore concludes that it was a clairvoyant dream and starts yelling that the plane is going to explode. Not bad for a movie that doesn't appear to be anything more than the latest teen slasher movie. And to top it all off, the part where the plane actually does explode, as seen from inside the airport, and especially the brief pause before the windows of the airport explode inward as well, is also one of the more satisfying scenes in the film. Unfortunately, it's pretty much all downhill from there. It seems that by avoiding being blown to bits on the plane, the kids who got off, some whether they liked it or not, seem to have cheated death, and death doesn't seem to be too happy about it. They are apparently being stalked by death, as he, or, more likely, she, begins killing them one by one in increasingly outlandish and sometimes laughable death scenes. Is this really as original and entertaining as the explosion scene at the beginning of the film? Probably not. In fact, not even close. A bunch of scared teenagers being killed off one by one. Can you name another movie where this has happened? Can you really name a horror movie made in the 90s where this hasn't happened? On the one hand, you know that nothing like these scenes would ever happen in real life. For the most part, computers that people have in their homes do not have anything in them that would explode if vodka were accidentally spilled into the monitor, and even if there was something like that inside it, it probably wouldn't explode through the screen, the strongest part of the entire thing. I also fail to feel any sympathy for someone who strangles in the bathroom because he thrashed his legs around while hanging by his neck from a cord, kicking his feet everywhere except directly underneath him. Take some knowledge, people, as this poor guy would have said. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, stand up. It'll save your life. And don't even get me started on the power line at the end of the film that whipped around like a severed worm in fast forward. This is just garbage. Couldn't they think of something better than that? Power lines do not behave like loose fire hoses on full blast when they are cut, they behave like cut cords. Probably the only death scene in the film that was really shocking and impressive, as well as relieving, given the character, was the one with the city bus. On the other hand, this stuff does have a sort of purpose. Sure, every death in the film was ludicrous, even the rather grisly one dealt to Sean William Scott, but this gives shape to the character of Death. It's one of the film's good points that the Grim Reaper wasn't personified as a huge shape in a black cloak, stalking the kids and killing them. That would have put Final Destination in the same stagnant pool with all of these other goofy teen slashers and also would have ruined the movie beyond all hope. Instead, we get these outlandish and often ridiculously exaggerated death scenes, so it almost gives the feeling that Death is taking time out of his busy schedule to hand these people their asses personally. As Mallory Knox would say, there's no escaping here. There are very few interesting things about this movie, other than such things as that you can see Tony Todd, known as virtually nothing other than the Candyman, in a small role as the freakiest mortician on the planet. Also, it's interesting to ponder what would possibly have made Alex so hated and feared for saving those people's lives, especially when he is alienated the most by the very people that he saved. Carter, in particular, develops an unfathomable hatred for Alex that swells to the exploding point. You'd think those jerks would be grateful. At any rate, the film as a whole is entertaining enough, but doesn't make much progress in attempting to elevate itself above the recent abundance of terrible teen thrillers and slasher movies and horror films. It is far above the abysmal level of such messes as I Know What You Did Last Summer and Valentine, as well as hideous spoofs like the Scary Movies, but Final Destination is definitely not meant for a more mature audience. If you decide to watch it, try to enjoy it for what it is, but keep your expectations low. Finally, a horror film worth a lot of praise. Final Destination has made my list as one of the best horror films in the wake of the teen/slasher revival. In fact, it's the most original horror film since the original Scream, and it may be better than Scream. There have been many cheap imitations, urban legend, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, etc., but this one is a keeper. The film begins with the most exhilarating 15 minutes in recent memory, and if you're afraid of flying, be prepared to be shocked. Alex Browning, Devon Sawa, is getting ready to leave on a class trip to France. While on the plane, he has a vision that the plane is going to explode. Later he awakes from this vision and immediately he goes crazy, telling everyone the plane is going to explode. Eventually 6 students and Alex leave the plane, and sure enough, moments after the plane takes off, it explodes. This is where the story gets interesting. By getting off the plane, Alex soon realizes that him and his friends have cheated Death, and they have to figure out when Death is coming back at them. The one thing I thought was truly good about this film was whenever Death came after the remaining students that got off the plane, it wasn't some Grim Reaper type guy you could see. Whenever Death was around, it was very subtle. Shadows, wind, etc. Death never showed his ugly head. He used everyday things to kill his victims. In fact, it was stuff that you could accidentally do in your home, and that is what makes this film scary. The acting is great. Devon Sawa proves that he can carry a film. He has great talent. Larter is a terrific actress who is well on her way to becoming the best actress of her generation, but Kerr Smith of Dawson's Creek shines here. He was really good, and I hope to see him in more films. Great film, worth every dollar I spent to see it. 10. Death is coming for you, and it won't be pretty. A high school class is boarding a plane to go on a trip. One of the boys has a vision of the plane exploding and decides to get off. A few other teens join him, as well as the French teacher. Upon takeoff, the plane does blow up, and so the group effectively eluded Death, at least for the moment. One scene wraps up this movie for me. The teacher is cooking something on the stove. She has a mug near the fire and it gets hot. She pours some liquor into the mug and the cold liquor cracks the hot mug unbeknownst to her. She proceeds to walk into her living room near her computer. Some of her drink leaks through the fine crack in the mug and gets into the computer monitor. The computer monitor short circuits and blows up, sending a shard of glass flying right into the lady's neck. She still isn't dead though. With blood spewing from her neck, she stumbles into the kitchen to get a towel. The fire is still going on the gas stove and they bring a lot of attention to that. Somehow she falls down on her back, but she is still groping for a towel. While on her back, with one hand still trying to stop the bleeding, she grabs the towel she was groping for. Oops! The towel was under a wooden block full of stored knives. They all fall out of the storage block, face down no less, and puncture her in numerous places. Death is not finished yet. To make sure she is dead, and that her young student doesn't rescue her, the towel caught on fire and proceeded to burn up the entire kitchen, the rest of the house, and of course her as well. Absurd. That describes the movie. It was wholly absurd. How many freakish ways can you be killed? I guess the makers of this movie wanted to explore all 6 million. It was bad enough that a girl got hit by a silent bus that was traveling 60 miles per hour and didn't brake, though it had splattered flesh all over it, and that a live wire took on a new meaning when it came to life and literally attacked people, but they had to go way over the top with the teacher. I don't mind reality being stretched a bit, but there are limits to where my intellect just says, this is too much. A masterclass in suspense, Destiny's chilling reckoning. Final Destination revolutionized the horror genre with its ingenious premise, expertly crafted suspense, and poignant exploration of mortality. James Wong's directorial debut weaves a complex narrative that lingers long after the credits roll. Devon Sawa shines as Alex Browning, a high school student whose eerie premonition of Flight 180's catastrophic demise sets off a chain reaction of events. Larter's portrayal of Clear Rivers brings depth and nuance to the story, while the supporting cast delivers convincing performances. Suspenseful storytelling. The film's pacing expertly balances tension and release, keeping viewers on edge. Wong's use of foreshadowing and clever editing heightens the sense of unease. Each death scene is meticulously crafted, making the audience question fate's design. Themes of mortality and destiny. Final Destination explores the human condition, confronting the inevitability of death. The characters' desperate attempts to cheat fate raise questions about free will and the consequences of altering destiny. Verdict: a masterclass in suspense, Final Destination remains a thought-provoking horror classic. With its well-crafted narrative, memorable performances, and haunting themes, it's a must-watch for genre fans. Positives. Suspenseful storytelling, strong performances, poignant exploration of mortality, effective special effects. Negatives. Some dated CGI. Despite showing its age, Final Destination's clever premise, well-crafted tension, and memorable characters solidify its place as a horror staple. Teen movie only. Story that lacks depth. I originally sought out the movie because of the James Wong/X-Files link. I was hoping for some thought-provoking movie in the horror genre, but I was disappointed. The story lacks depth. It's essentially a bunch of teens running around getting bumped off. Does that sound familiar? On the plus side, the start was great. After the first 15 minutes, I was left wondering where could it go after this? Unfortunately, it went to exactly the same place as the movie Scream. I thought it was a great movie to look at and the acting was good, it was just the story that was lacking. I would recommend the movie if you are into teen movies or if you are a teen. I guess if you are into the X-Files, you might want to check out what Mr. Wong is up to. It's worth watching, but not buying. 06/10. This isn't bad for a teenage horror movie. The past years there has been a real boom of teenage horror movies and thrillers. Just think of Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer. This one is good, but not very special. We see a class preparing to go on a field trip to Paris. One of the students gets a vision of the airplane exploding, killing everybody inside. He escapes together with a teacher and some other students. But crossing Death's plans doesn't mean that they will stay alive. One by one they get killed in the most incredible ways. And that is where, in my opinion, the biggest weakness of this movie lies. The ways they die are so incredible. If this had been a comedy, I wouldn't mind, but now they want to be taken serious and that is where they fail. That doesn't mean that I don't like the movie at all, but it will never be one of my favorites. I give it a 6/10. The good. Basically every horror movie of the Fog and Flash era if the late 90s and early 2000s spawned a franchise, but this one actually deserved it. What an awesome concept. This movie is super inventive, genuinely creepy at points and a ton of fun. The bad, there are some half-baked ideas, like the lame shadow monster, and subplots in here that never fully develop. Please explain how the main dude is never arrested. Please. The movie also isn't as nearly as inventive as the later films, but I can't really fault it for that. The ugly. Speaking of said shadow monster, yeah, I'm very happy they abandoned the sentient villain for an unexplainable, uncaring force of the universe. It works so much better. Scared me good. I have to admit that when I first saw the previews for Final Destination, I didn't think much. But after reading several reviews that said how good it was, I thought about seeing it, but couldn't because of a busy year. The story is about a kid named Alex, Devon Sawa, who just so happens to have a fear of flying. With a class of 49 students, they are going to France on a field trip. When Alex has a horrific premonition about dying in plane crash, he freaks out and is kicked off the plane with 5 other students and teacher. Minutes after getting kicked off, and Alex is calm, the unexpected happens, the plane actually does explode. Over the next few weeks, however, teachers, the survivors, as well as the police become increasingly suspicious of Alex. Some of his friends even think of him as a god. Anyway, the survivors of the plane crash soon begin dying in gruesome and sometimes horrific fashions. Alex soon discovers that by getting off the ill-fated flight, that he had intervened with Death's predetermined pattern. Death, however, has made a new pattern and Alex must find out what it is to save his friends as well as himself. I have to say that this movie scared me and my parents good. I also must say that this film deserves a lot praise. Although the plot is not original, however the antagonist is, Death itself. What I really liked about it was that Death never showed itself and that it turned simple everyday items into murder weapons. Of course no horror movie is perfect. There is one beef I do have with Final Destination. Some of the death scenes are pretty creative and terrifying, but some of them seem to have been forced. I mean, who is going to place a beverage on top of a computer monitor? Other than this one minor flaw, Final Destination is still a great and scary horror film. Uniquely entertaining. Once in a while a film comes along that you have no hopes for, but which pleasantly surprises you anyway. And into the oversaturated market of the teen flick comes Final Destination, a dizzying and suspenseful shocker which has to be the best teen horror film we've had since Scream. Alright, I know that's not saying much, but watch this anyway. Tired viewers will be glad to hear that this teen-orientated film isn't full of moronic dialogue and boring situations set in a school. Instead, the film is focused entirely on the central premise. There is no deviation. Created by the two guys who made the X-Files so interesting when it first started, James Wong and Glenn Morgan, this is, at last, an original film. There is no bogeyman here, no masked slasher, instead the killer is fate itself. I'd give my right arm for a little bit of originality these days, which is why this film enthralled me so much. The film starts off excellently with a strong sense of impending doom and a horrific-to-watch plane explosion. It then slows down only to pick up the pace in the second half, becoming both exciting and thrilling. Of course, it's the deaths which are the highlights of the film, and these definitely do not disappoint. In between them, we get some typical teen angst as the Devon Sawa tries to convince his friends that they're about to die. Sawa, who starred in horror comedy Idle Hands, is surprisingly good in the lead role, giving us a likable neurotic who manages to be heroic when the time comes. Okay, so the rest of the cast are merely passable, full of the beautiful but bland faces populating most American soap operas these days, but it's nice to see Tony Todd pop up in a cameo as a creepy morgue attendant who gets all the best lines. As I mentioned before, the death scenes are outstanding, yes, fantastic. They consist of a series of commonplace accidents which culminate in the victim's demise. They're grisly and surprisingly gory in places, making a nice change these days from relatively bloodless stuff like I Know What You Did Last Summer. Okay, so the fiery, frenetic climax is a bit predictable, but there's a nice twist at the very end. Final Destination is a clever film, and one to be watched. It has a uniqueness about it which sets it above the rest, and it's thoroughly enjoyable too. What more can be said? Appalling, abysmal, ridiculous, pathetic. This movie has to be the most disappointing of the year. I don't understand how people have claimed that it is even remotely original or interesting. The entire film is packed to the brim with the traditional horror movie clichés, such as the curtains blowing in the wind and the strikes of lightning occurring every time something bad is about to happen. Not only that, but each death becomes more and more predictable as the film progresses, and by the time Billy was randomly decapitated by a piece of metal sent flying by a train, I was just laughing. The only commendable aspect of the whole saga was that the enemy, Death, was never visible, although whenever he was about to strike, there would be a lamentably stereotypical shadow cast across the room. Not even the plane crash was remotely scary, and the actors showed very little emotion about the fact that 50 of their classmates had just been killed in a mile-high fireball. Several killings were unbelievably improbable, such as Todd's suicide in the bath, Terry's collision with the bus, which I cannot believe nobody saw coming, and the electrocution and train scenes, where, amazingly, Alex manages to cheat death. For a film which was supposed to promote the idea that death is unavoidable, Final Destination has an abysmally happy ending. The cherry on the cake, though, was seeing Tony Todd in cameo role as the morgue attendant who tells Alex, "I'll be seeing you soon." Worth seeing so that you can spend a couple of hours mocking every aspect, but this movie can't really score more than a 4. Interesting original concept. Alex, Devon Sawa, is going to France on a school trip. He falls asleep and has a vivid dream where everyone dies in a fiery crash. It's so vivid that he freaks out and gets thrown off the plane with many of his fellow students. The plane actually explodes and those people seem to escape death. Only something is hunting them down one at a time. It's a great original concept. However, it doesn't lend itself to being filmed in a compelling way. Basically, weird things happen and everybody dies. There isn't a crazy manic. The kids aren't trying to outrun somebody. Death is invisible. That's the whole point. It's just one weird death after another. There's something much more visceral about an axe murderer gutting his young nubile victims. Surrealist suspense, spoilers. Final Destination pulls off a great trick. While managing to retain a commendably non-scream seriousness of purpose, a solemn accretion of suspense, a faithfulness to genuine fears and emotions. The multiple deaths in the film are as blackly funny as they are elaborately gruesome, but this note of the comic in an otherwise grimly portentous movie never betrays its ambitions. These are some deaths, though, some intolerably protracted, implausibly set up, yet deliciously executed, others sharp, horrifying, hilarious shocks, one of which suggests the scriptwriters must have seen Lin-Marie Danzai's brilliant short Fetch, where autobuses are used to similar effect. With films like The Sixth Sense and X-Men, it looks like surrealism, once mocked as a dotty, marginal movement, has finally pervaded the Hollywood mainstream. Not only does most of the action take place at night, but there is also an early suggestion that the whole thing is dreamt by Alex, not just the first plane crash, as he falls asleep on the eve of the trip. The clock showing 1 o'clock fades into the 180 that is the number of the plane. The dissolve is drawn attention to, signaling a move into the dream or imagined that the film never comes out of. The narrative, therefore, becomes an expanded unconscious, a drama of a whole set of fears. It is appropriate that Alex is 17, on the brink of adulthood. His dad dolefully suggests that his whole life is ahead of him, as if freedom, youth, fun are all at an end. And they are. As all fears are often sexual in basis, it is appropriate that Alex doesn't reach the final destination of the title at first. The plane crash is a coitus interruptus, like the bomb that stops the kiss and touch of evil. It is a stunting of growth, a refusal to move into adulthood, to progress sexually. Paris, of course, being the stereotypical city of love. As his friends are either trying to get off with girls, or are lucky enough to have one, Alex remains a solitary figure, locked into his own mind, whose only sexual relief is an old copy of Penthouse. Whereas the teen movie, for all its modish trappings, is generally conservative, concerned with finding a mate, fitting in, asserting order, like a Shakespearean comedy, setting the continuity of the species in motion. Alex is a destructive force, linked to death, the scrap paper with Todd written on it, as well as alluding to his friend, also refers to the German word for death, sterility. We are never quite convinced that the events are out of his control. In one brilliant sequence of cross-cutting, Alex's opening of his penthouse is linked with the leak of Todd's toilet, setting in motion his friend's death. Alex's onanistic seed a murderous power. As the film proceeds, he becomes increasingly detached from community, from reality, setting himself up as a godlike power, imposing patterns on the randomness of life, right down to the obscurely arrogant climactic gesture of self-sacrifice. Even when order seems to be asserted at the end, he has finally reached Paris, and he has a relationship with a woman, has joined the status quo. He is unable to deal with it, he has to destroy it. Like Melville's L.E. Samurai, Destination is a dream of masculine selfhood, of wholeness, of the fears that it will be diluted, fragmented, by compromise, society, difference. As a study in heightened megalomania, Destination reaches heights from modest ambitions unavailable to the risible pretensions of the beach. The surrealist aesthetic also informs the film's treatment of suspense, a steady accretion of normal, familiar, domestic details, imbued with the terror of a diseased mind. The opening airport sequences are a masterpiece of anticipatory dread, the everyday made malevolent. The unsensational revelation of the plane explosion, a mere firework, in the background as boys fight, is staggeringly, resonantly beautiful. Sequences such as the tasteless memorial to the air crash victims, a statue of an eagle, suggest that surrealism, as Breton said of the English, is less a view of the world than a way of life. For some reason films like this and The Faculty are treated with hostility and indifference by critics. Don't you realize you are living in a golden age of horror movies? First and the best. Final Destination is a movie that starts a new era in Final Destination, and I think that this movie is the best from all of these which followed this one. In this movie we have a teenager who had a vision of him and his friends in which all dying. He succeeded to save them, but now death will hunt them down all one by one and he will never stop. I liked this movie because it was something new and I had never seen a movie like this before. I think that this was something which made this first movie of Final Destination so good and special. I liked the plot of this movie and I also liked that throughout the whole film had suspense and you could not predict what it's going to happen next. Quite good for a teen slasher flick. I really liked this movie. It's probably one of the better teen slasher flicks to ever hit the screen. Let's face it, teen slasher flicks are not outstanding cinema. The writing is always lame, the plots are even lamer, they're usually vehicles for the latest trends in fashion and music and showcases of the heartthrob and slash or bombshell of the month. They're really just vehicles for post-pubescent hormonal stimulation. But Final Destination is different. First, it has real imagination going for it. The plot is unlike your typical madman in the corn chases teenage bombshell through puddles. It actually took some thought to put this together. It's not just shock factor movie making, they actually sat down and outlines how all the deaths would work in a way that keeps the plot alive. A tale of kids trying to cheat death's design is much harder to write than a dude with a chainsaw. Then there's the death scenes themselves. Outstanding. I love a clever death scene in movies like this, it's why you pay the $8. And these are some doozies. You can tell the filmmakers sat around for hours simply trying to find the coolest way to kill people. And if you have a sick mind, like yours truly, you'll find these death scenes simply hysterical. A really good movie. 8 out of 10. I'm giving it a high score because it's outstanding within its genre. Starts very well, but gets a little too silly toward the end. A minor spoiler here. A very good premise that gradually, and inevitably, drifts into teen horror film territory. I say inevitably because there is a group of teens involved, so obviously there can be no long-term seriousness. Still, I was a little surprised just how unseriously the movie ends. When one compares the excellent beginning with the ridiculous horror/comedy ending, it is like looking at two different movies. It's a pity that the premise wasn't taken and assigned to a cast of adults, i.e. that a serious horror film wasn't made. Nevertheless, FD is never dull, even the obviously weaker second half. The flight disaster scenes are terrific, the murder scenes are very good, and there is real interest as to what is going to happen next, in spite of a premonition that the conclusion can't and won't be satisfactory. The conclusion is almost like a mockery of all the previous happenings. The movie turns from horror into the horror comedy genre. Easily the dumbest scene, however, isn't the ending but the way the aggressive teen turns around his car to beat up the movie's main hero, and nearly kills the bicycle-driving teen, while completely ignoring the fact that he nearly killed him and caused an accident. That was really, really dumb. Very promising start but a horrible ending. Contains some plot spoilers. Having read a lot of promising reviews here and on other sites, I walked into the theater expecting some sort of Scream-ish movie, but with a story and good acting, despite the unknown actors. But it didn't really turn out the way I thought it would. The first scenes, with the unbelievably realistic air crash, vision, and the sudden explosion of the plane, in real life, were magnificent. No one could have done it better. But the problem was to find original accidents that will happen to the survivors, and that's where the movie loses its rhythm. The first one with the water was nice and very original, but the rest of the movie was just cliché copyright after cliché copyright. The writers seemed to like the story they found, with the dumb coincidences and the plan of death stuff, and decided to keep reusing that idea till the end of the movie. Special effects and coincidences would do the rest. But the special effects didn't do nothing. All I noticed were some horribly irritating electricity wires flying across the screen. And despite all the coincidences, who by the way make the movie very unrealistic, the movie stays a little predictable. The first 15 minutes were great, the last 15 minutes sucked really hard. It's just a bunch of things happening without a story. Alex escapes death for like 20 times, talks to himself about death not going to get him and stuff, and the last moment he realizes what everybody in the theater had already figured out. Plot spoiler: he hadn't changed seats and it isn't his turn after all, while he had escaped death for 20 times. That doesn't make any sense, and so he runs to Clear's house where things keep going wrong. The director must have said from this point, FK the story, let's just have some more electricity, bad luck, and everybody doing stupid things nobody else would do in their place. If the movie had been longer like this, I surely would have walked out of the theater. My God. For some dumb reason, plot spoiler, everyone survives the car that blew up and nothing happens for some months, until they go to Paris by plane. 40 of their friends died in an air crash and they just survived it, and a few months later they travel by plane? Ha 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 ha, and suddenly death seems to remember them and things start to go wrong again. The air crash and the first killing were great and certainly deserve a 10/10, but in the end it's just such a horrible mess. 6/10. The Grim Reaper is coming to town to finish what could have been a tragedy for everyone. This is one of my favorite horror films since A Nightmare on Elm Street film series. It is simple and basic, mainly about these teenagers trying to escape a horrible encounter with death himself or itself. Because death can come in so many mysterious ways that can't be explained by science or common sense. I loved all the deaths. It reminded me of a show now on TV called 1000 Ways to Die. It displays and explains how a person died in such a mysterious way or a bizarre way that some people can't describe it or won't believe it at first thought. The deaths were phenomenal and so unbelievable that I can't describe it or anyone else cannot do it. I really thought that the first scene on the plane was pretty good because you would never suspect a plane exploding or splitting it two ways. It is so phenomenal and so unusual to learn and to process throughout the brain and the mind. I really thought that the last scene when the three teens are in Paris, when the sign on a store or hotel comes swooping down and hits the teen who questions who is next to die on death's list and who will be saved. That scared me and I am like, there had better be a sequel to this film and it better be as good as this one. But I have learned that there are more of these films to come and go and I will sit back and watch them roll and see people die. Really fun film. Thanks to the original trilogy I am scared of flying, driving, and I am damn sure that I will not enjoy my next roller coaster amongst many other more mundane day-to-day activities portrayed in these excellent films. The catastrophes in these movies are so impressively detailed, mapping out the end of each victim's life. This movie itself is where it all started. It is a good starting point too. The tragedy is devastating, the quality of young talent impressive, and the whole idea scary and yet interesting. The film is well made and graphically violent. This is clever horror that will make you think twice about your very own existence. Whatever that existence is. Classic filmmaking and a very entertaining and fun movie. It is even a little scary. Love the characters, the story, and the entertainment. Final Destination, 8/10. When you go to watch a movie like Final Destination, which is obviously a teen horror movie, you take your chances. You could get something genuinely creepy yet tongue-in-cheek, like Scream, or you could wind up seeing something like Darkness Falls or They. You just never know. When Final Destination came up on my Netflix list, I didn't know what to expect. Would it be something original and scary, or just some lame dud? Thankfully, it turned out to be the former. Alex, Devon Sawa, along with about 40 others, are all set to take off on a plane destined for their senior trip in France. Right before it is set to take off, however, he has a premonition that shows him that soon after takeoff the plane will crash and everyone on board will be dead. He and others are forced off of the plane, and, sure enough, the plane crashes with everyone else on board. While everyone thinks that Alex caused the accident, he knows that they were supposed to die on board. Soon, everyone who was supposed to be on the plane start dying one by one. Knowing that this was written and directed by the same team who did Willard, I knew that a lot of the movie wouldn't be just needless blood, but that there would be some sort of a creepy atmosphere to it all. And, by gum, there was. Although it wasn't as atmospheric as the aforementioned movie, and it relied a lot on sudden violence, it was still creepy. It seems like horror movies today rely on quick jumps to scare the audience. Final Destination sure had some, but also the music and the general movie itself was thrilling. When you could see that something was going to happen, you wanted to yell at the character to not do so and so. Then you sit back and enjoy the ride. Something else that surprised me was how many special effects were needed. That was one major drawback. At times, the special effects didn't look real at all, the bathroom scene, or there were too many when less is more, the final, climactic storm. One other thing that upset me was the constant need to do odd lighting. Because of the off-again, on-again lighting, it's sometimes impossible to tell what's happening. In Final Destination's pursuit to become something ultra-modern, nifty camera movements are tried, but for the unnecessary reasons. For example, a long, overhead tracking shot is used when two people are going to the bathroom. Very unnecessary, if you ask me. I just realized how much Glenn Morgan and James Wong are fascinated with people going to the bathroom. There must be a few scenes of that in Final Destination, and one quite humorous one in Willard. I also thought that the movie took too long to get started. We understand that Alex will see the plane crashing, but for about the first half hour that's all that's implied. It's very annoying. Thankfully, the characters aren't as stupid as they usually are in teen horror movies, and I did like all of the talk about death's pattern, etc. Overall, get on board to Final Destination and it won't crash. Great concept. Final Destination was really the first horror movie I got really fascinated with as a kind. Death is an entity coming to get you, you can't stop it, you can't see it, you can't hide from it. To me it is really one of the scariest movie villains put to screen. That it came about as a discarded X-Files episode is really special, and the influence of the show is very much felt in this first installment. There are two inspectors trying to figure out the strange deaths. A dark, philosophically twisted way to tell the audience that death could be around any corner. That today the set of events could have been set in motion that makes you meet your demise. The characters trying to escape that feels like they are escaping their destiny. What has been planned for them? They are desperate to take control over this part of their life, an analogy for staying alive against all the odds that life itself can throw at you. Alas, it is a bit held down by mediocre acting. But, to me, it is a great horror movie with a novel, interesting concept that death can put in motion a Goldberg machine-like set of events that can kill someone in a bizarre accident. This has to be one of the most terrible horror movies I've ever seen. This movie is completely ridiculous. The premise, that people can cheat death but then be fated to die, is not bad. But the execution on the movie is so terrible that it becomes comical and lame. The build-up to before the plane crashes is long, drawn out, and overdone. And that's not even the worst thing about the movie. Each death scene shows a person doing regular activities, and they focus on about 17 different ways that person could die, until finally, after a ridiculous long amount of time, the person dies in the most completely impossible and stupid manner you could imagine. And not only that, the dialogue falls flat on the floor. There's nothing about the movie that even makes you remotely care about whether any of the characters live or die. I would expect better out of a high school project. I won't describe any of the death scenes in case you actually want to watch it, but my advice is, don't. I've seen a lot of horror movies, and this is probably in the bottom 3. Well, Devon Sawa stars as Alex, who along with his high school classmates are heading to France. Before the flight, Alex begins to feel strange and sees indicators that death is about to greet him. He freaks out after a vision before the plane takes off, and he and a few others end up back at the terminal. Of course, the plane explodes and Alex and the remaining few have escaped death, but unfortunately that wasn't part of Death's plan. Final Destination started off very promising, especially before and during Alex's vision, and Devon Sawa does a great job. Unfortunately, the remaining characters and script becomes very ludicrous and obvious after the first victim. This is where the film falls apart, as the characters themselves become silly and cliché, as well as the script where the dialogue is used to explain the plot points. It really felt obvious when Tony Todd arrives unbelievably as a mortician to explain the situation to Alex and Co, and especially the audience. Many things wouldn't occur as they did in this film, and eventually I was getting frustrated with the silly indicators that death is coming. When one of the characters plays a John Denver record, I was like, gimme a break. Seriously, the concept alone could have made this movie chillingly scary if it was done right. Unfortunately, it wasn't, and none of the characters were developed well enough to have their own underlying signs or chemistry for that matter. It got very annoying very quickly, and don't get me started on the stupid ending. Hollywood needs to write better scripts, and Final Destination is yet another forgettable film without the tongue-in-cheek and clever self-awareness of the Scream series, nor the innovativeness of the Blair Witch Project. Ali Larter and Sean William Scott also stars in Final Destination, but I would hardly recommend this film as some others have on here. Nice concept, poor film. The year was 2000. Horror had run out of ideas. We've seen everything at this point: masked killers, ghosts, even leprechauns in space. But Hollywood was running out of ideas. The late 90s had been taken over by slasher killers, and movies could only keep redoing this formula and just keep changing the masks. Luckily, writers behind the hit phenomenon X-Files had an idea to create the ultimate killer. One you couldn't just shoot in the head, one that not only couldn't be stopped but that you couldn't even see: death itself. Plot and script: 7/10. The premise, originally conceived as a X-Files episode, was to use death itself as the ultimate killer. It's almost genius because death is inevitable. After foreseeing a plane crash, student Alex postpones the inevitable by taking a group off the plane, saving their lives, only for death to come back hunting them one by one to finish the job. It's a great concept that was highly original. But this was 2000. Hollywood loves teen victims. And the formula here followed suit. Characters were very stereotypically movie teens, similar to the late 90s slashers. And all adults, whether it be parents or law enforcement, are completely useless. The dialogue not particularly strong for anyone, and some of the effects are aged. The death scenes are more than slightly unrealistic, but unlike the ultra-gore of movies like Saw, it's actually fun to see how death orchestrates his means of killing. Cast: 5/10. The majority of roles played here are by young actors playing dumb teens. The script not calling for award-winning performances, so don't expect any. They are all fine, so as long as you're not expecting too much you can't be too disappointed. Overall, 7/10. Yes, if you compare it to more modern movies, not everything has aged amazing. For the most part, screenplays now are more polished, but this was 2000. Concept-wise this was original, even if the dialogue wasn't. Sadly, it's harder to see the originality now, because by late 2025 this concept would have been beaten to death with 5 sequels. After watching Final Destination 5, I set out to buy this one and others. After watching this one, I thought it was very well put together. It really gives you the best idea as to what the film and cheating death means, which I never knew before watching the franchise. Alex Browning has a premonition of a plane explosion and panics and gets off with 6 others including a teacher. Only for the incident to place for real. Then a month goes by with the police and people growing suspicious of Alex. Then afterwards death starts pursuing those who cheated their fates by manipulating the environments in deadly ways in order to kill them in the order they should die in. Alex gets accused/blamed for each death and his friends grow increasingly suspicious of him and think he has something to do with them all, including the plane explosion, and start avoiding him. The first few deaths I liked. Todd Wagner's strangulation in the bathtub was well done, as well as Mrs. Luton's kitchen death, with the kitchen knives impaling her in the chest. The only things I didn't like were how the deaths progressed throughout the film. Such as Clear's death scene, how there was just no build-ups to the death scene, and how ridiculously it was done with the pool and the blowing wines. I would have preferred them to be like Todd's death or even Valerie's death, where it takes place in a single place or room etc. with objects about. But overall, despite the milked exaggeration here and there, it was a pretty good concept for a teen horror film. Butler, Pa. Around the time of Final Destination's production, teen slasher films were very popular. The film was made to capitalize on that fleeting market, but I have to give recognition to the writers and director for trying something a little bit different, at least for the time period in which it was made. James Wong did a good job directing. His style is far from innovative, but it provides the film with a nice tone. The screenplay could have went better. Though better than an average example, FD still suffers from lack of character development and some mediocre dialogue. There are far worse examples in the genre, though. The acting was also good. Ali Larter was the only one I really didn't care for. She just seemed rather uninterested in what she was doing. There really wasn't that many parts I found to be particularly suspenseful or scary, though they will keep you from slipping off into boredom. The final 15 minutes or so was also rather dull. A good example of later teen horror films. There are evident negative elements, but there are some good ones too. If you don't take yourself too seriously, you should find it at least decent. What if you could predict your death? Would you prevent it or let it come? I finally decided to give the Final Destination movies a chance. I didn't want to see them when they were released because of the actors, just a bunch of Dawson Creek teen drama TV actors, and I figured the movie would probably suck or be a Scream ripoff. But today I decided that maybe I should give these movies a chance. I heard from a couple people that they were pretty good. I apologize to the writers and director of Final Destination, because this was one of the better horror movies I have seen in a while. Basically, Alex and his fellow students, including 4 teachers, are going on a field trip to Paris, but Alex has a horrifying nightmare of the plane crashing horribly and exploding, killing everyone. Right before they take off, he screams and tells people to get off, but only 6 follow him, one of which is in a fight with him, one of which believes him, one of which who was late for the flight, one of which was a teacher comforting him, one of which was his best friend, and one of which is the girlfriend of the guy who is in a fight with Alex. The plane explodes, killing everyone. Thinking they're safe, Alex realizes that they were meant for death and it has a pattern, but it's a matter of playing death. Final Destination is original and a terrifying story that brings up the interesting subject of fate and destiny and if you make it or things should happen naturally. Not to mention the pretty cool death scenes that occur in this film is any horror fan's dream of watching. This is one of the better horror films of this generation and I'm looking forward to the next sequel. Death Like Time has got its own plans. Without being an absolute masterpiece, Final Destination is a good fantastic movie that deserves to be watched. It borrows several elements from other movies or novels such as Scream or And Then There Were None, but it exploits them very well. And this is helped thanks to a clever script that includes a few qualities, notably this one: we can't really see death but we can feel its presence and its cleverness. Moreover, the suspense is well lead during all the movie until the end. But if Final Destination isn't a masterpiece, it's because it also contains faults. For example, how can Alex, the hero of the film, succeed in seeing these odd visions about accidents that are going to happen? Then, he doesn't get on well with one of the main characters. You can consider him as his worst enemy, and however they'll be compelled to help each other in order to escape from death. You could also say that certain sequences are predictable while some are on the verge of unlikely. Nonetheless, a rather good fantastic movie. Final Destination, a decent creepy thriller. Final Destination is a decent horror thriller from writer/director James Wong. The cast of young stars are admirable in their roles, including Devon Sawa, Larter, Kerr Smith, Sean William Scott, and Tony Todd in a brief cameo appearance as an exceptionally creepy mortician. The rest of the cast also turned in good performances. This is one of the few horror/thrillers that I was very impressed with. For those of you who haven't seen it, I won't say anything about it except that it's an above-average horror thriller with some flaws in dialogue and some unanswered questions, but the good outweighs the bad. If you're a fan of these movies, then you'll enjoy this one too. With just the right amount of intense inventive deaths, an interesting premise, solid acting for the most part, suspense, and some thrills, Final Destination is an entertaining horror movie to watch. Better than average, that's about it. 6/10. The downfall of this movie begins when two of the teenagers break into a morgue to visit the corpse of a dead friend. They are met there by a really bad plot device in the guise of a mortician. Morticians are expected to have coarsened sensibilities due to working alongside death every day and maybe a little eccentric as well, but this one is way over the top. Of course, he's not there as a real character but rather as a means to give away the plot along with any lingering mystery still contained in the movie. How he knows what he knows we dare not ask. We're just supposed to accept that someone who deals with corpses on a regular basis has a deep metaphysical insight into how death operates. Not only that, he also knows the precise predicament that the teenagers are in even though he's never met them. His only real function is to trim some time from the movie's length so that the real characters don't have to expend any excess energy discovering what they're up against. I guess the other thing I didn't like about the movie was the teenage twist factor contained in the movie's ending. You know how it goes, the supernatural or fate, in this case, must play by certain rules so that the movie will seem more like a game to the target audience, mainly teenagers. But rules are kind of constraining and predictable, even to teenagers, so the movie sets up a false ending that's not really the ending because there's one more act to the game before it's over. Most recently the movie The Ring did this false ending along with countless others before it. To be honest, the movie overall is inferior to a decent X-Files episode. For example, the FBI agents just do not command respect. Somehow they lack the deadly seriousness portrayed so well in that series. The victims in the movie are dispatched in particularly gruesome ways, and although some are very effective in jolting the viewer, it does give one the feeling you're watching a teen slasher movie with an invisible diabolical John Denver working in place of Freddy or Jason. I'm really kind of disappointed that Morgan and Wong didn't do a better job given their extensive background with the X-Files. Surprisingly entertaining and tense, with a great side performance from Tony Todd. Pros: 1. Despite the overall ridiculousness of the plot, the subject of death is deftly and intimately handled. 2. The practical effects are really impressive and they really help to bring the specter of death to life, ironically. 3. Devon Sawa, Alex Browning, gives a really good performance. 4. Tony Todd, Bloodworth, delivers an incredibly sinister and mesmerizing side performance. 5. The gore and violence is brutal, unforgiving, and uncomfortable, which serves up some gnarly and unforgettable deaths. 6. The tension and suspense is built magnificently via the well-timed close-ups and the slow zoom-ins. 7. The film serves as good commentary on the unpredictability and relentlessness of death, as well as the fact that living just to survive is no way to live, especially as death will get you anyway. Cons: 1. At times, the sound mixing is distractingly delayed. 2. Somehow none of the characters heard or saw the bus that ended up hitting Terry Chaney, Amanda Detmer, before impact. 3. The special effects, unsurprisingly, look a little dated. Death's design. Final Destination is a clever and engaging horror film that stands out for its inventive premise and its ability to turn everyday scenarios into nerve-wracking encounters with fate. Directed by James Wong, the movie offers a fresh twist on the slasher genre by replacing the traditional masked killer with an unseen, unstoppable force, death itself. The result is a suspenseful, sometimes darkly humorous exploration of inevitability and the futility of trying to escape fate. The story begins with a chilling sequence in which a group of teens, led by Alex Browning, Devon Sawa, narrowly avoid dying in a plane crash after Alex has a premonition of the disaster. What follows is a tense, escalating series of events as death methodically tracks down the survivors, delivering elaborate and often shocking accidents to reclaim its due. The film's central conceit, death as an unseen but omnipresent antagonist, keeps the tension high and allows for a series of inventive and memorable set pieces. The death sequences are the film's highlight, showcasing a mix of creativity, tension, and macabre humor. Everyday objects and scenarios are transformed into harbingers of doom, keeping the audience guessing about how each character will meet their end. This element of unpredictability is one of the film's greatest strengths, making even mundane moments feel charged with dread. The characters, while not particularly deep, serve their purpose in driving the narrative. Devon Sawa delivers a solid performance as the paranoid and determined Alex, while Larter adds emotional weight as Clear Rivers, a fellow survivor grappling with the concept of destiny. Though the cast largely adheres to typical teen horror archetypes, their chemistry and genuine reactions help maintain the film's suspense. While the premise is undeniably intriguing, the film occasionally struggles to sustain its momentum. The middle act can feel repetitive as the survivors try to decipher death's plan and avoid their fates, and the philosophical questions raised by the plot about fate, free will, and mortality are only superficially explored. Despite these minor shortcomings, Final Destination remains an entertaining and memorable entry in the horror genre. Its unique approach, combined with its suspenseful pacing and inventive death scenes, makes it a standout film that spawned a successful franchise. In conclusion, Final Destination is a gripping and fun watch for horror fans, offering a fresh take on the genre with its creative concept and execution. While it may not delve deeply into its themes, it succeeds as a thrilling, edge-of-your-seat experience that keeps audiences hooked until the very end. A gripping and unpredictable thrill ride. Final Destination is a gripping horror film that explores the terrifying concept of fate and the inevitability of death. After a high school student, Alex Browning, has a premonition of a catastrophic plane crash, he and a group of passengers are removed from the ill-fated flight. However, they soon realize that destiny cannot be cheated, as they are pursued by a series of bizarre and deadly incidents, leading them to confront the chilling notion that death is inescapable. The film's premise is both unsettling and thought-provoking, immersing viewers in a suspenseful and unpredictable narrative. As the characters grapple with the realization that they are being targeted by an unseen force, the tension steadily mounts, keeping audiences on the edge of their seats. The intricate and inventive death sequences are a testament to the film's creativity, offering a macabre and unforgettable viewing experience. Final Destination excels in delivering a unique blend of horror, suspense, and psychological unease. The well-crafted storyline, coupled with the skillful direction, ensures that the film maintains a sense of urgency and dread throughout. The cast delivers strong performances, effectively conveying the characters' escalating fear and desperation as they attempt to outwit an implacable force. Furthermore, the film's exploration of mortality and the fragility of life adds depth to the otherwise adrenaline-fueled narrative, prompting audiences to ponder the profound themes interwoven within the chilling tale. In conclusion, Final Destination is a masterful exercise in suspense and terror, offering a pulse-pounding journey that will leave viewers questioning their own beliefs about destiny and mortality. With its gripping plot, inventive thrills, and compelling performances, this film is a must-watch for horror enthusiasts looking for a truly unsettling and unforgettable cinematic experience. Creative teen horror. A high schooler headed to his class trip has a terrifying vision of his plane blowing up and ushers a few classmates and teachers off the plane to safety. When the plane takes off and does explode mid-air, the terror has only just begun as, one by one, the survivors are killed in a variety of creative freak accidents. But is there some way to stop this? Final Destination is much glossier and smarter than many of the post-Scream teen horror films, with a great cast and some really excellent special effects. It's not surprised that it spawned an entire franchise in its wake.